a biblical perspective on life, culture and current events. This is 2020 on Vision.
On a Wednesday, we love to check in on that breaking news out of Israel and more broadly across the Middle East. And Mandy Worby with her finger on the pulse. Another update for us today. Mandy, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you. Nice to be. Doesn't Wednesday roll around quickly?
It does. Hey, you know, it's rolled around quickly. Big developments in Israel, Gaza, broadly across the Middle East.
Yeah.
War has resumed in Gaza, really, just in this last 24 hours.
Yes, it has.
What have you been monitoring?
Yeah, well, here's the thing. There was a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hamas, and there was supposed to be different phases for the release of the hostages. It always costs Israel a whole lot more than it does Hamas, but Hamas keeps putting it off, and they keep breaking it. Now, you know, and I know that President Trump already said that if they don't release the hostages, he said all hell will break loose. And he's basically given Israel permission to do whatever you have to do to get those people back, because Hamas is committing war crimes every single day. And they keep pushing back and pushing back and pushing back. So Israel said, we're done. And they basically resumed the war because Hamas broke the ceasefire agreement and they refused to negotiate. So that's what they've done. They've literally... Listen, they've really smacked them hard this time. As far as Israel is concerned, the gloves are now off. Now, don't mistake this for the fact that Israel is not warning the Palestinians. They're still warning all of the civilians, giving them time to get to safety. They're still doing all of that, but the gloves are off. They're hitting them hard.
Everyone will know that those threats are real, and they might be experiencing now that all hell breaking loose type terminology. Let's talk about those hostages, though. What do you understand about the remaining hostages being held by Hamas?
Well, the Israeli ambassador told us that there are 59 hostages remaining in Gaza, and they believe 24 of them are still alive. That's the estimation. Now, Hamas is always leaking little, photos of, proof of life, and their hostages are in very dire situations. As we know, they're starving them, they're torturing them, they're not getting medical aid to them, they're not allowed to see any, International Red Cross people, they're not given any contact with their families, and under international law, they're supposed to be provided that. And they're not. So they're in dire straits. And what that does is it tortures the families and the nation of Israel, and it's manipulating them. So the situation is very, very dangerous. Now, with the escalation of war again, Hamas has said if Israel doesn't stop the fighting, they're basically going to kill the hostages. So this has always been Hamas's MO. And this is, what most experts are saying is that Hamas are never going to release all of these hostages. They're not. Because the second they release the hostages, Hamas then has no leverage over Israel. They know that when all the hostages are returned, they're over. They're done for. And they obviously don't want that to happen. And I was going to say that Israel is insisting that they're not going to compromise anything less than what the US Representative Witkoff has outlined for the release of the hostages. And what that basically means is that they're not going to agree to the release of less than half of the hostages as part of a deal. They're not going to grant Hamas a prolonged ceasefire. And Defence Minister Katz of the IDF has promised, or in the parliament, he's not in the IDF, but he's the defence minister. He has promised that if Hamas won't release the hostages, the blows against them, the strikes, the intensity is going to intensify.
The crazy thing in all of this, the thing that sometimes seems so hard to understand, is that this all could have been over very quickly if those hostages had been released. But there's been method in that madness. And all about Hamas on centre stage here.
Yes.
It could have been over a long time ago.
It could have been. But here's the thing. The big thing for Hamas is expulsion of Israel completely. They want no Jewish state at all. And they've already got, through violence, they've got the Gaza Strip, which Israel only had because after the 6-Day War, Egypt didn't want it back. That's the only reason Israel was in there to start with. But here's the thing. Israel has said to them, this is a new policy that's about to be implemented, I believe. Not yet, but it's about to be. And that is, if the hostages are harmed, for every hostage that is harmed, Israel is going to annex another little portion of the Gaza Strip. So if Hamas don't want Israel to retake the Gaza Strip, they better not harm the hostages. They need to give them back, because for every one they harm, Israel say, we're going to take that patch. And the next one that gets harmed, right, we're going to take that patch. So, they're putting as much pressure as they can. They've already switched off the power to the desalination plant. They've already closed off all of the entry-exit points for aid. I mean, look, Hamas is drowning in aid. They've got 1.4 million tonnes of aid that they've hoarded for themselves. There's no shortage of aid, but no more is going in. So Israel's putting the pressure on in every way they can.
A lot of people like to draw attention to the rules of war and this sort of moral equivalence that people like to assign, that both sides, but only ever Israel is held to some level of account for rules of war, because it's clear that Hamas doesn't obey rules of war, but no one seems to be holding them to account at all.
No.
What do you understand about the rules of war and how this works in this conflict?
Well, what I understand about the rules of war is that Israel actually abides by all rules of war. And remember, Israel didn't start this war. Hamas did. So basically the rules of war are this. You can't target civilians because that's a war crime. All non-combatants have to be protected. Prisoners of war must be treated with dignity. That means no starvation, no torture, no degradation, no isolation from communication with the outside world, and they must be given medical care. Number 3, medical workers, they care for the wounded on both sides. They have to be protected, and that includes attacks on hospitals, civilian buildings. But there is an exception. If a hospital or a civilian building or infrastructure is then used for military objectives, it's no longer protected. It now is a legitimate target for war. There is no rape or sexual violence allowed. That is forbidden. And you're not allowed to use unconventional weapons. Chemical or biological weaponry is outlawed. And guess what? Every single one of those Israel has maintained and enforced. Every one of those except for the last one, which is no use of chemical or biological weapons. Hamas has broken all of them. And yet Israel is the one who is condemned. I mean, it's insane.
All right, the pressure is really on Hamas now to release the rest of these hostages. And as you very astutely say, they're not likely to do that because that will be a sign of their own end. But things are moving towards an end for Hamas, would appear. What about all of these alternative suggestions, relocating the Gazans? How are you seeing developments there?
Yeah, well, initially, remember, President Trump said the Gazans, they can't stay in Gaza. It's not habitable, right? It's not habitable. It's a mess. They can't stay there. For their own safety, they can't. So they need to go elsewhere. And, of course, he initially said Egypt and Jordan. Jordan eventually said, no, we'll take a couple of thousand sick children, but that's all. And Egypt said, no, we're not taking them. I'm going to come up with another plan where they stay there and we'll just rebuild it. And Israel and America said, no, that's not going to happen. So the alternative is that maybe they could go to another Muslim nation. The suggestions are Syria, Sudan, Somalia, or maybe Somaliland. However, the responses, as you can imagine, have not been very successful. Syria, well, it's in meltdown as we speak with another war, and it's getting nastier by the day. And all of these nations have very complicated and challenging relationships, shall we say, with Israel. I mean, the leader of Syria turned around and said that Trump's plan of evacuating the Gazans is a crime that will ultimately fail. This from a man who is actually a designated terrorist himself and whose soldiers in his new regime and army are committing war crimes and terrorist acts every day. But then you've got in Sudan, they have been hostile to Israel, but they were party to the Abraham Accords, so there's that in their favour. They're currently in the middle of a civil war, and they never actually got to develop ties with Israel, unlike, say, the UAE, Bahrain and Morocco. So that's not a great option. Then you've got Somalia. They support the Palestinians, but they are a very, very poor country and have their own battles with terrorists there. Then Somaliland, they've been independent since 91, but they're not recognised by most countries, and they are also extremely poor. But at the end of the day, like it or not, Neil, the Muslim nations of the world, they claim to care about the people of Gaza. They are going to have to step up and take the people of Gaza because they cannot live in Gaza anymore. It is not a livable, inhabitable place.
Lots of delays appear to be happening here from the Hamas side. The writing's on the wall. In fact, it doesn't look good for their future. If you're a leader, as I understand it, and I'm not sure whether the rumours, but even one of the Hamas leaders apparently killed in the latest attacks there from Israel.
Five died overnight, and one of the leaders, senior leaders of Palestinian Islamic Jihad, has gone too.
So, but they're going to be really, they're in the focus, in the crosshairs.
They sure are.
You know, the whole world will be wanting to bring them to account.
Yeah. Well, we say that, except you've got the United Nations, which has just been deemed an apologist and mouthpiece for terrorist organisations. Since October 7, the United Nations has really, really proven itself to be the most anti-Semitic organisation on earth, which is very, very pro-terrorists. It's really shamed itself. It's humiliated itself. It's got no credibility at all. But what is interesting is that the United States and Israel have established what they've called the Joint Task Force October 7, and the function of this particular task force is to hunt down and prosecute Hamas leaders and their supporters. This is being headed up by Attorney General Pam Bondi, as well as the new FBI Director Kash Patel, and they've announced that they're going to be investigating potential civil rights violations and acts of anti-Semitism by those supporting the group in the United States. They are going to be taking this to college campuses and to anybody who is funding and supporting Hamas terrorism. They will not tolerate it. So this is really actually a very good thing. Maybe it will encourage other nations, that remains to be seen, to follow suit. They're also going to be helping victims from the October 7 massacres and a whole lot more stuff. It's going to be a very, very effectual, I think, very effectual task force.
Well, all these things are unpacking right before our eyes right now. When you watch your next news report, you'll be seeing all sorts of new footage about what's going on.
Tomorrow, what I'm sharing today is going to be obsolete because it's moving so fast.
So what we're talking about are Israel and Gaza, but it's not just Israel and Gaza because everything has just blown up in some sense this last 24 hours.
Yeah.
Hezbollah to the north and Israeli attacks there.
Yep.
The Houthis, I think that's the Americans who are taking action against the Houthis. I've even heard that there's more aircraft carriers from the US on their way to the region there. So, I mean, these things are heating up everywhere.
Absolutely. And don't forget, all of these proxies are all armed, sustained and equipped by the Islamic Iranian regime. They do everything these guys are all puppets of the Iranian regime. But yes, fighting has resumed in southern Lebanon because Hezbollah, according to the ceasefire agreement, are not supposed to go south of the Litani River. Well, they are. They're going south of the Litani River almost straight up to the border again, trying to re-establishing themselves. So Israel has hit back because they broke the ceasefire agreement. They've also had to hit weapons depots and sites in Syria, because those will be used against Israel. And Israel is saying we're not tolerating it there either. And of course, the Houthis, they said that they started firing missiles again as soon as Israel closed the entry ports for aid. And they said, if you do that, we're going to start firing missiles. They did. They also targeted the USS, and I just can't remember it, but a very, very famous American warship. They targeted them. So is America... They have gone in hard. They've taken out some of the Houthi leaders and they're going to keep going. They're not going to tolerate it. My first initial read of an article was that the Iranian regime have distanced themselves a little bit from the Houthis, saying, we didn't tell them to do it. We didn't tell them to do it because they don't want to get hit. They're already under pressure because of sanctions and whatnot that President Trump has put in place as soon as he got into office. And their defence systems are not as good as they were because Israel actually knocked a lot of their capacity out, although They apparently are very, very, very close to nuclear capabilities, and Israel and America have said that is not going to happen. So right now they don't want to tick anybody off. So they've distanced themselves from that. But, you know, this is the state of play at the moment. Today, next hour, it could change, and it invariably will, Neil.
Things changing
Lots
by
to pray
the hour. That biblical challenge to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, you can see just how powerful the peace of Jerusalem is, because the whole world is influenced and even being involved in this conflict in some form or another.
Yeah.
And Mandy Worby, always just great getting your insights. I really appreciate these updates each week. Thanks so much for updating us again today on 2020.
Thanks for taking time to listen to this audio on demand from Vision Christian Media. To find out more about us, go to vision.org.au.